Search and rescue teams from around the world are still scrambling to find survivors in the wreckage of a collapsed building in South Florida. The high-rise condo fell suddenly 5 days ago in Surfside, just north of Miami Beach. 151 people remain unaccounted for. Hundreds of emergency personnel are digging through the rubble. At least 10 people are confirmed dead, including the people you see here. CBS News national correspondent David Begnaud is in Surfside with more on the rescue efforts and speculation as to what may have caused this tragedy.
We have been told repeatedly, rescuers are moving fast but carefully. One wrong move could mean another disaster.
We need to be sure that the pile does not fall on them, that it does not fall on any possible survivors.
What they've done is dig a trench beneath the rubble. So far, it's 125 feet long and 40 feet deep. There's an Israeli search and rescue team hoping to rescue people here just like they did after the 2010 Haiti earthquake.
We need more people down here.
That's when crews found people alive 8 days after the quake. Here on Sunday, for the first time, families of the missing were escorted to the disaster site. Meanwhile, this morning, there are questions that remain about the structural problems with this building. There was an assessment done by engineers in 2018, and one part took a look at the parking garage and found abundant cracking and spalling of varying degrees observed in the concrete columns, beams, and walls. Also in the report, though some of this damage is minor, most of the concrete deterioration needs to be repaired in a timely manner.
Absolutely. Why wasn't it? Timely can't possibly mean more than 2.5 years later.
That is attorney Brad Sohn, who is representing at least a dozen victims and was the first to file a lawsuit the day of the collapse.
The association knew or should have known that there were structural integrity problems. It should have been addressed at the time that they became aware.
Also in the report, this quote: "The main issue with this building structure is that the entrance drive, pool deck, planter waterproofing is laid on a flat structure. There was no slope for drainage, so the water had to essentially evaporate." There was an engineer who took a look at the report and told CBS News that nothing warned of imminent catastrophe, and an attorney for the Homeowners Association said the same thing. There was nothing that those engineers wrote in that pretty standard report that indicated, hey, y'all better get on some type of repair or this building is going to collapse. David Begnaud, CBS News, outside the disaster site here in Surfside, Florida.
Let's turn now to Matthys Levy in Burlington, Vermont. He's a world-renowned structural engineer, and he's also the author of Why Buildings Fall Down, How Structures Fail. Matthys, welcome. Great to have you with us. So when you watched the video of this building in Surfside as it collapsed, and you compare it with other disasters you've examined, what stands out to you?
Well, the first thing is I was working on the World Trade Center collapse, and the method or the mode of collapse for this building was very similar. It just pancaked down once it started failing. But there was a trigger involved in the World Trade Center collapse, which was obviously the plane flying into the building and causing fires and causing the columns inside the building to soften up and not be able to carry the load. I think a similar kind of phenomenon took place here, whereas one or more of the columns at the base of the building that had been seriously corroded, damaged, suddenly failed.
And so, as we just heard in David Begnaud's report there's been a lot of focus on a 2018 warning from engineers, which wrote about major structural damage to the concrete slab below the pool deck and abundant cracking in the underground garage's support system. So, based on the videos you've seen and whatever preliminary information we have at this point, what issues do you believe were likely present in the building's foundation, and how might they have contributed to its collapse?
Well, as far as the foundation is concerned, one of the things that we do know or I've heard about is that the building has been settling for a long time. So it's been going down and down and down. Now, the second thing is from the inspection report, it's clear that some of the columns at the base of the building were already damaged in some way, either caused by water infiltration, saltwater infiltration from the fact that the deck was not completely properly waterproofed, or from the fact that the concrete reinforcing steel inside the concrete had begun to corrode and pop some of the concrete out.
And how much is the fact that these buildings, this building and other buildings nearby, are built not on bedrock like Manhattan is built on, but essentially it's a sandbar, correct? With water underneath. If you go down deep enough, is it difficult to make buildings structurally sound in that sort of terrain? And further, does rising sea levels, as we're seeing through climate change, does that pose a risk to these buildings as well?
Well, climate change certainly has an effect, a long-term effect, and I would imagine that's going to be true all along the coast of Florida and even all the way up to New York and even further north. But the question of the settlement and how the foundation interacts with that, we don't know exactly, because we haven't been able to determine whether the foundation of the building, exactly what the foundation of the building was. It's assumed that it was actually founded on the sand and not on bedrock way, way down.
And does that make it more vulnerable then?
The sand under the building can over time become filled with water, and that makes the sand a little bit soupy. So it begins to soften up and allow settlement to take place, possibly differential settlement, which is what could have been one of the causes of the failure.
Interesting. Differential settlement, meaning one part of the building is sinking a little bit while the other remains more elevated, correct?
Exactly. And you see from the
now there is
video, I'm sorry.
Sorry, go ahead. I interrupted you. Sorry, go ahead.
No, from the video of the collapse, you can see that there is something happening. The one part of the building seems to collapse first, and then a second part is pulled in and collapses subsequently. The first portion that collapsed is actually adjacent to a concrete wall which surrounds the stairs and elevator shafts. That kind of acts as a stop. So the failure can't go beyond that point.
So there is, of course, a sister tower just north of the collapsed condo with the same design, same developer. Inspectors say that building is sound, but should residents there be concerned?
Frankly, residents anywhere along the coast should be concerned if there hasn't been recent inspection to determine if there is corrosion in the reinforcing steel and any kind of failure of the concrete. So that's a very important aspect and should be done before the residents are allowed to either go back to the building or consider leaving the building temporarily.
I hope they are doing that. And further, Matthys, what makes this situation a challenge for rescuers? Did they face any sorts of threats in the search? Any chance of a further collapse as they are doing the very important business of trying to find survivors?
Well, the most difficult thing is we're still in a kind of a rescue phase. So in the rescue phase, you try not to disturb things too much because you want to give the people who have survived a chance of life. And that means that you can't really lift off or roughly lift off some of the slabs that are sitting on the ground. What you want to do is gently move them so that the spaces underneath are not too disturbed. In the later stages, obviously, when it's determined that there are no more survivors, they can remove the whole structure. And at that time, it'll be easier to possibly determine exactly what happened.
Well, Matthys Levy, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you sharing your expertise with us.
You're welcome.